James, you recently shared something great within the company in terms of market direction versus market conditions. Can you elaborate so our viewers at home can actually see where you're coming from, since you're in daily talks with people in the banks and clients that are actually transacting at the moment?
This is something I'm really passionate about at the moment. And I'm seeing, I think you said something about situations like this separate boys from men. Something that's becoming very apparent to me is a general limited understanding of the property asset class as an investment. So one of the key things to be understood here is that the property investment class is different fundamentally to most other asset classes, particularly different to something like commodities or shares. So if you're investing into shares or commodities, the market direction directly impacts on the profitability of your investment in the long term. If I buy, I'm going to use $1 million as a round number here, all right? But if I buy $1 million of shares, the value drops to 800,000 and then comes back up to 1.2 million, I made 20% profit. Yeah, if I'd bought at 800,000, I would have made a 50% profit. So I would have been better to wait and to buy the shares when they were cheaper. Property is fundamentally different because its core benefit is gearing other people's money. Okay. All right? So if I can borrow with a smaller deposit, my long-term ROI, return on investment, is always going to be better. So the example I use, take for example someone on the cusp of the GFC, where in September 2008, everything's about to fall apart in world economies, right? But right now, you can buy a home and borrow 107% LVR, right? You can put no deposit in, right? You can buy an investment property, you can borrow 95% and have your lender's mortgage insurance capitalized on top. So $1 million example again, I'm buying $1 million property and I'm putting in $50,000. We're going to ignore stamp duty and lender's mortgage insurance, they don't really change. Put in 50 grand. Now, the market drops. Now, we know in the GFC the market didn't actually drop that far, the property market in Australia, but let's accept all the speculation. The market drops 20%, same as we just did for shares. We're down, this same property is now worth 800,000. Some guy buys the property next door, and he buys it for 800,000, same property exactly. Now he's feeling like he's a bit of a winner. He's paid 200 grand less than you did, happy days. But when a market softens, banks have to tighten their lending. They have to. It's one thing to lend 95% to someone when a market's going up, but if that market starts to come down and you keep lending 95%, you're going to lose a lot of money. So when you see markets soften, lending reduces. Now in the GFC, it didn't drop much, but still we saw lending kind of capped at 80%. It was pretty hard to go above that. If we truly saw a 20% drop, we'd probably see lending at 50 or 60%. That's never happened in Australia, so there's no data on that. Yeah. But let's assume that even with that 20% drop, lending only got capped at 80%. Lenders are still being aggressive. So our friend, the smart investor, has bought the same property as you. He's put in a $160,000 deposit. He's cashed up, he doesn't mind. He's made a great bargain. Now the market turns around, and it does. We know over time the market will go up. So at some point in the future now, that property is 1.2 million, the same as our share portfolio. But in our share example, the one that waited made more profit. In property, the guy who waited has only made a 250% return. He's made $400,000 off his $160,000 investment. But the guy who bought before the crash and utilized that higher LVR has made a 400% return. He put in $50,000 and made $200,000. If our friend, the smart investor, had simply bought 3 properties before the crash instead of waiting to buy one after, he would have made a substantially higher return. So when you're talking about property investment, the key question is what is the market environment, not the market direction. The LVR and the lending opportunity is way more important to your future return than the market direction is. It's better to buy immediately before a crash than it is to buy after a crash. And to be honest, I don't actually see a crash at all. I see a short-term thing. But the more the market drops as a result of this, the worse it will be for you that you didn't buy now, because your LVR will go down.
So the fact that we sort of all sort of speaking and hearing and all the news of the doom and the gloom, that by itself creates to some extent with the doom and the gloom.
Sure.
And the perception at the moment with the market is that the market is sort of collapsing and it will collapse, right? So going against the tide, I go back to absolute fundamental to it. I said, what has changed in Australia, set aside the virus, that has changed in the whole world, not in Australia. in the whole world as such. What has changed in Australia just about, say, 2 weeks ago, just about a month ago, as opposed to now? A month ago, I was reading through on the newspaper saying that the auction clearance rate was high 70s and low 80s.
Yeah.
A month ago, I was looking through, and I was sort of looking through into the month of February as an example, that New South Wales had over 4% growth, annualized growth in that 1 month. We were supposed to have the biggest, one of the biggest amount of growth in this year. Now, what has changed from that point of view to now? The only thing that I can think of is that the employment, right? I mean, of course, the virus and everything else is the employment. So the question that I ask is that employment that changed, is it a structural change or is it a short-term change? And one probably argues that there may be some structural adjustments because once we go through with all of those, right? But fundamentally, it is still a shorter-term change. Its employment has changed simply because pubs and clubs and the restaurants have been closed. But pubs and clubs and restaurants are not always going to be closed. As a matter of fact, when the pub opens, I would argue the sales of the pub will increase a lot more because I'll have that extra 1 beer on the pub, right? Of all the beer that I missed out with the other beers as such. And the sales will increase, right? So I think it's about that within that shorter period of time, that one is that how do you survive? So you are not being forced to sell it. We only make the loss when we're forced to sell it. So we make sure we do that. And then the next question is that once we survive, how do we thrive? How do we take the benefit in a human way? But how do we take the benefit in a human way in the circumstances as we are?
Yeah, and I guess that's exactly why people pay people like you to do that investment analysis.
Yeah.
Something I've been trying, the key point that I'm making here is that you can take that analysis out. I think you're exactly right. This is exactly what I'm hearing from analysts I'm talking to, that the property market in even the medium term is not really in any danger. But take that aside, from a fundamental how does property investment work perspective, the more the market reduces, the lower LVRs go. Right? And they don't necessarily recover. After the GFC, LVRs never recovered. You still can't get the LVRs you could get before the GFC. You could get return on investment from investment in 2008 that you cannot get today, just purely because of that gearing. So when you look at the market, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the result of the coronavirus will be that either the market will go down or it will go up. One of those two is very likely to happen. Or it might stay level. It doesn't matter. If it goes up, of course you wanted to have invested because it's gone up. You've missed an opportunity. If it goes down, you will lose more by waiting than if you had waited and it went up. When that LVR drops, your long-term return on investment will be impacted far more by waiting than you will lose by waiting and the property market goes up. This is absolutely not a time to be waiting. Now, if you're going to lose your job, that's a different question. Right? Do you want to invest into something when you're about to not have a job? Of course you don't want to do that. Right? We talk about liquidity, we talk about sustainability. You have to be able to pay that mortgage. But if your job is stable, and when we look at Australian demographics, we talked about a 1 million unemployment rate, then they talked about 6 million people receiving this new payment. But we're still talking about comfortably under 40% of our population, right? We've got more than half of the people in this country right now that are in their jobs, know they're staying in their jobs, and nothing really is going to go wrong with that job. If that's you, you should be taking action. You should be doing something.
This is not the first time we are, having this crisis. Crises come up with different names. We call it GFC, we call it recession, we call it, Spanish flu or COVID now or different names. See, this is not the first time, and it's not that we're not going to have crisis. But what I have found that every time when the crisis hits, we tend to think very short term. We're just talking about now. And then, when the cloud, this all will be over, and I have heard people saying, Jack, you know what, when I came here in Australia, this was the property, I wish I could have, I would have, These are the talks going to happen again. And this will be a history. This will be a talking point. So don't get lost in the short term. If you can afford it, get into it. If you can't, then of course.